When we think of serial killers, most of us imagine violent, ruthless men. But sometimes, horror comes from the quietest places. A hospital room, a delivery ward, or the back seat of a car. In today's video, we'll uncover 4 of the most disturbing female killers of the 21st century. Women who didn't kill for pleasure, but for something even more twisted. Our first killer today is Kimberly Saenz, the bleach nurse. Kimberly Saenz was a nurse in Texas. In less than 1 month, 5 patients died under her care, not from illness, but from bleach. Instead of saving lives, she took them, targeting the people who trusted her the most. Before the killings, Kimberly Saenz seemed like a typical working mother. She had 2 children, a husband, and a job in healthcare. A nurse, someone sworn to protect and care for the sick. On the surface, she was unremarkable, average, ordinary, but beneath that surface lay a storm of volatility, impulsiveness, and rage. Kimberly had a long history of behavioral issues. Her employment record was filled with red flags, repeated firings, accusations of verbal abuse, and erratic, sometimes violent behavior. Former coworkers described her as unstable. She was the kind of employee who sparked tension in break rooms and drew complaints from both staff and patients. And yet, despite these warnings, she was consistently rehired. It wasn't just carelessness, it was systemic failure. Hospitals and clinics, reluctant to report her to nursing boards or law enforcement, quietly let her go and passed the problem to someone else. One of those places was the DeVita Dialysis Clinic in the small town of Lufkin, Texas. It was 2008, and that decision would prove to be catastrophic. DeVita serves some of the most vulnerable patients in the region. People with kidney failure came here several times a week, hooked up to machines for hours at a time to have their blood filtered and their lives prolonged. Many were elderly, frail, and deeply dependent on the nurses who ran their treatment. On the surface, everything seemed routine. But inside the clinic, a silent predator was at work. Kimberly Saenz, despite her track record, had been hired as a full-time nurse. She had access to medication, to IV lines, and, most crucially, to people who were too weak to defend themselves. She moved between patients with gloves on and a calm demeanor. But beneath that calm was something darker, something deadly. While others worked to keep patients alive, Kimberly carried something far more lethal than medicine. Then, without warning, the deaths began. One patient suffered a violent seizure mid-treatment. The staff was stunned. Seizures were rare in dialysis, and this patient had no known history of them. Then, just days later, another patient collapsed. A third died within minutes of sitting in the chair. Within a span of 3 weeks, 5 patients died unexpectedly. All of them had one thing in common. They were under Kimberly's care. Panic started to bubble beneath the surface. Nurses whispered to each other. Something felt off. Too many deaths, too sudden, too strange. But without physical evidence or eyewitnesses, no one could accuse Kimberly of anything, and accusing a nurse of murder was no small claim. Still, the clinic couldn't ignore the pattern. Administrators made a decision: install hidden cameras in the treatment area, not to accuse, but to observe, to understand what was really happening. What they captured would shake the medical community. Kimberly Saenz was caught on camera entering the supply closet multiple times. She wasn't grabbing medication, she was pulling cleaning supplies, specifically bleach. The footage showed her drawing a clear liquid from an unmarked container. She walked calmly over to the patients, inserted the syringe into the IV line, and injected it. It happened in seconds, quiet, deliberate, calculated. Toxicology tests on the deceased confirmed the worst. Traces of sodium hypochlorite, household bleach, were present in their bloodstreams. At first, the results seemed too surreal to believe. Bleach? Who would inject bleach into a person? But the lab results didn't lie. And Kimberly's calm movements on camera made it even more chilling. There was no hesitation, no remorse. A fellow nurse came forward, reporting that she'd seen Kimberly tampering with IV bags, flushing lines without reason, and discarding syringes outside of protocol. The pattern was undeniable, and the smell was unmistakable. One nurse would later testify, "I bent down to assist the patient and smelled bleach on their breath. I knew something was terribly wrong." When a patient's blood smells like bleach, there's no defending that. Kimberly Saenz was arrested in April 2009. The charges were heavy: 5 counts of capital murder, 5 counts of aggravated assault, and multiple charges related to patient endangerment. The trial began in 2012. Prosecutors painted a picture of a nurse who had cracked under pressure, whose instability had finally erupted into calculated homicide. The defense argued she was being scapegoated, that the clinic was covering for systemic failures. But the evidence, the bleach, the video, the witness testimony, was overwhelming. In the courtroom, Kimberly showed little emotion. Families of the victims gave heartbreaking testimonies, holding photos, sobbing openly, and demanding answers. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. She was found guilty on all counts. The sentence? Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kimberly Saenz became one of the most chilling cases in American medical crime history. A nurse, sworn to heal, had become a silent executioner.
You've seen.
But Kimberly Saenz was not the only woman hiding monstrous secrets behind a calm facade. Up next is a mother, not a nurse, not a stranger. A woman who brought life into this world, and then took it away. If you're drawn to the darkest corners of true crime, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what comes next. Our next killer isn't a nurse. She didn't work in a hospital. She didn't hunt strangers in the dark. She gave birth to her victims, and then murdered them with her bare hands. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman secretly gave birth to 7 babies. 6 of them never left the house alive. Megan Huntsman lived what most would call an ordinary life. In a modest house in Pleasant Grove, Utah, she raised 3 daughters alongside her husband. From the outside, the Huntsman family looked like any other suburban household. Their lawn was trimmed, their Christmas lights came up every December, and their girls walked to school with backpacks and lunchboxes like everyone else. But Megan had a secret life, one ruled by addiction, depression, and emotional withdrawal. She battled methamphetamine use for years. Her marriage was crumbling. She became distant from her children, often shutting herself off in the bedroom for hours at a time. Her emotional detachment was growing, but no one imagined it was anything more than drugs or depression. Friends and neighbors saw a woman who looked tired, disconnected, but not dangerous. No one suspected the horror that was unfolding behind those closed doors. Not even her own husband, who shared a bed with her for years, knew she was pregnant. Again and again. She hid her pregnancies, wore oversized clothing, skipped social gatherings. When she went into labor, she did it in secret, in silence, alone. And once the babies were born, she ended their lives, quickly, quietly, methodically. In April 2014, Darren West, Megan's estranged husband, was finally moving back into their old home after serving time in prison on unrelated drug charges. The house had been vacant for some time, cluttered and dusty, full of forgotten boxes and furniture. As he started cleaning out the garage, he stumbled upon a small white box tucked behind a stack of clutter. It looked out of place, sealed with layers of tape and partially wrapped in a black garbage bag. Curious, he opened it. Inside, he found a tiny corpse. The decomposing body of a baby, wrapped in cloth, sealed in plastic, and hidden away like trash. He immediately called 911. When police arrived, they began a full search of the garage, and what they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators. There weren't just 1 or 2 boxes. There were 7. 7 infant bodies, each hidden in separate containers, each wrapped carefully and placed in the shadows of the garage. The air turned cold. Officers froze. Some turned away, fighting back nausea. One detective later described the scene as the most haunting discovery of my entire career. What had seemed like a tragic, isolated incident quickly transformed into one of the most horrifying serial child murders in U.S. history. Megan was taken into custody within hours. She didn't deny anything. In fact, she confessed, openly, even calmly. She told detectives that between 1996 and 2006, she had given birth to 7 babies in total. Of those, 6 were born alive. She had killed each of them shortly after birth, either by suffocation or strangulation. Only one child, she claimed, had been stillborn. She said she didn't want more children, that her drug addiction had taken over her life, that she felt overwhelmed, trapped, and incapable of raising another baby. She never sought help. She never told anyone she was pregnant. Not even her husband. Not even her mother. The babies were born in secret, killed in silence, and hidden away as if they never existed. Megan spoke about the murders with a chilling level of detachment. She wasn't emotional. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. Her voice, according to investigators, was flat. Flat, like someone who had accepted the evil they had done long ago. But the question on everyone's mind was this: how? How do you hide 7 pregnancies from your family, from your husband, from your children? Investigators soon learned that Megan had become a master of concealment. She wore baggy clothes. She avoided people. She gave birth alone, inside her home, in total silence. When the babies were born, she didn't scream. She didn't call for help. She didn't even ask for medical attention. She murdered the newborns within moments, then cleaned up the mess, wrapped their tiny bodies in cloth, sealed them in plastic, and hid them in boxes among old tools and paint cans. No death certificates, no names, no record of their existence. They had been erased before they had even lived. The most haunting detail wasn't the murder itself, it was the calm, the routine. The fact that Megan went back to life each time as if nothing had happened. She cooked dinner, she watched TV, she took her daughters to school, and 6 times she committed an unthinkable act, then folded it away like laundry. Neighbors who knew Megan were horrified. Some recalled moments where she seemed withdrawn or distant, but no one had ever suspected she had been pregnant. Her own family claimed ignorance. The babies had all been conceived and murdered while her other children were living under the same roof, in total silence. Megan Huntsman was formally charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder. In court, she did not fight the charges. She pled guilty. She said she deserved whatever punishment the court decided, but even then she offered very little explanation. Her only words were, "I was in a dark place." Prosecutors pushed for the maximum penalty. The judge agreed. She was sentenced to 6 consecutive terms of 5 years to life in prison. That means Megan Huntsman will likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. There were no televised outbursts, no dramatic breakdowns, just the quiet gavel of justice falling on a woman who had hidden the most horrific crimes in the most ordinary home. She had turned motherhood into murder. Megan Huntsman's story isn't just about murder. It's about shame, denial, and a silence so profound it cost 6 lives that never had a chance to cry. But our next killer wasn't silent at all. She was loud, angry, explosive, and she chose her victims in a hospital bed. If you find yourself drawn to these chilling true crime cases, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story. Our number 3 killer became a media spectacle. A drifter, a sex worker, a woman with a gun and a vendetta. Aileen Wuornos murdered 7 men in cold blood, all while claiming she was the real victim. She said it was self-defense. But 7 times? This is the story of a woman driven by trauma, rage, and ultimately, revenge. Aileen Wuornos was born in Rochester, Michigan in 1956. But from the very beginning, her life was marred by tragedy. Her father, a convicted offender, hanged himself in prison before Aileen ever met him. Her mother abandoned her at the age of 4. Aileen and her brother were taken in by their grandparents, but the so-called safety of that home was a nightmare of its own. She was beaten, attacked, and emotionally destroyed. By 11, she was trading street worker for food, cigarettes, and shelter. By 14, she was pregnant after being attacked by a friend of her grandfather. The baby was given up for adoption. By 15, Aileen was thrown out of the house. She lived in the woods, slept in abandoned cars, ate out of dumpsters. By 20, she had drifted to Florida, working as a highway street worker, hitchhiking from town to town, surviving on tricks, booze, and her own fractured rage. She had been arrested dozens of times for theft, forgery, assault, and prostitution. And with every mugshot, her stare grew darker, her smile faded. Inside her, something had been festering. A lifetime of being used, beaten, and ignored. Something was about to explode. Between 1989 and 1990, 7 men picked up Aileen Wuornos on Florida highways. They were ordinary men, businessmen, laborers, retirees. They never made it home. Aileen shot them, often multiple times using a .22 caliber revolver. She stole their wallets, dumped their bodies, and disappeared back onto the road. Richard Mallory, David Spears, Charles Carskadden, Troy Barres, Dick Humphreys, Walter, Gino, Antonio, Peter Seams. One by one they vanished. She claimed each of them had tried to rape her, that it was self-defense, that she had no choice. But the crime scenes told a different story. Several victims were found with their pants still zipped. Some had been shot in the back. One had been killed execution style. Investigators noticed a pattern. The same kind of bullets, the same method of disposal. Aileen wasn't just killing for survival. She was killing with purpose. At first, police were baffled. The victims had no obvious connection, different professions, different towns. Then a breakthrough came from an unexpected place, a pawn shop. A necklace belonging to one of the victims had been pawned, and the receipt? It had a fingerprint. The print matched Aileen Wuornos. Surveillance footage showed her driving a victim's car. Another item had been pawned under her name. Clues were piling up quickly. But the biggest crack came from someone close to Aileen, her lover, Taria Moore. Taria and Aileen had lived together for years, but when police brought her in for questioning, Taria flipped. She agreed to help catch Aileen in exchange for immunity. She called Aileen from a hotel phone multiple times, crying, pleading, asking her to confess. And Aileen did. On tape, she admitted to all 7 murders. Her voice, once aggressive, trembled, her tone cracked. The highway killer was caught. The trial of Aileen Wuornos was unlike any before it. The media swarmed. Reporters called her the first female serial killer of modern America. Cameras captured every glare, every outburst. And Aileen gave them a show. She raged in court, called jurors names, accused the system of corruption. One moment she wept, the next she screamed. She said the police wanted her dead, that they were using her story to sell movie rights, that Taria had betrayed her. Her mental state was collapsing, diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, suicidal, paranoid. But the evidence was clear. She was convicted of 6 murders and sentenced to death. Even as the sentence was read, Aileen stared coldly ahead. She said, "I was raped. I'd do it again. I have no remorse." In the years that followed, documentaries were made, books written, psychologists debated. Was she a predator or a product of abuse? Was she hunting men or running from the ghosts of every man who had hurt her? On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison. She declined a last meal, just wanted a cup of coffee. Her final words were chilling. "Yes, I would just like to say, I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus, June 6th, like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." She died at 9:47 a.m. Her body was cremated, her ashes sent to her childhood friend in Michigan. But her legacy? It lived on. She became the subject of countless true crime documentaries, talk shows, and the Oscar-winning film Monster. Some saw her as evil, others as a tragic figure destroyed by the very world that made her. One thing is certain. Aileen Wuornos forced America to look at what happens when pain festers too long, when justice is out of reach, and when rage finds a weapon. She said she killed to survive, but survival doesn't leave 7 bodies on the side of the road. If you found this story chilling, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. She may have killed over 60 infants, not with a knife, not with a gun, but with a syringe and a smile. Genene Jones was a pediatric nurse, calm, trusted, always nearby when things went wrong. She was supposed to save lives, but one by one, the babies died, in her hands. They came to the hospital for healing. She gave them death. In the early 1980s, Genene Jones worked as a licensed vocational nurse at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. It was a busy pediatric ICU, filled with some of the most fragile patients imaginable. Premature infants, babies with heart defects, toddlers clinging to life. And Genene, she was always there. Quick to act, loud in emergencies, almost always the first to call for help when a baby went into cardiac arrest. She earned a reputation for being a hero in crisis. While others froze or hesitated, Genene seemed to thrive on chaos. Parents praised her, supervisors saw her as tough, resilient, reliable. But slowly, whispers began to spread. Some doctors noticed a strange pattern. Too many babies were dying, too many unexplained emergencies. And there was another constant, Genene Jones. When she was on duty, the mortality rate spiked. At first, colleagues chalked it up to coincidence. Pediatric ICUs are heartbreaking places. Some children don't survive. But this wasn't normal. Soon, the whispers turned to fear. The deaths were often bizarre, sudden, and terrifyingly silent. A baby stable for hours would suddenly crash, heart rate plummeting, blood pressure vanishing, breathing stopping. Autopsies didn't always offer answers, but some began revealing traces of drugs that hadn't been ordered by any physician. Digoxin, heparin, succinylcholine, all powerful substances, all capable of stopping a heart, especially in infants. Doctors and pharmacists double-checked logs. Some medications had gone missing, some had been signed out without clear documentation. And in the background, Genene, still working, still responding to codes, still positioning herself as the nurse who caught it just in time. It was brilliant in a way. She created the crisis and played the hero. Hospital administrators began to panic. But instead of contacting police, they made a different decision, one that would prove catastrophic. They forced her resignation. No investigation, no charges, no warning. They even wrote her a reference. And Genene? She simply moved on. Genene took a new position at a small pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas. Less oversight, fewer staff, fewer questions. And the deaths resumed. This time the victims had names. Chelsea McClellan, a vibrant, healthy 15-month-old. She had a minor illness, nothing life-threatening. Genene gave her an injection during a routine visit. Within minutes, Chelsea went limp. Her heart stopped. She died in an ambulance on the way to the hospital. At first, it was ruled a tragedy, but something didn't sit right with the child's parents or the medical examiner. A closer look at Chelsea's records raised red flags. Genene had administered succinylcholine, a fast-acting paralytic drug, used in surgeries, in lethal injections, not in routine pediatric care. Genene had kept vials in her personal bag, unmarked, unlogged. And Chelsea wasn't the only one. Other infants had collapsed after injections. Others had coded suddenly with no explanation. The evidence began to grow. Too many dead children, one common nurse. Authorities finally stepped in. An investigation began. Bodies were exhumed, tissue samples analyzed, and what they found was devastating. Multiple babies had traces of unprescribed drugs. Some were injected with toxic levels of digoxin, which interferes with heart rhythm. Others had heparin overdoses, which thinned their blood until they bled internally. But the most chilling? Succinylcholine. The drug breaks down quickly in the body. Detecting it is difficult. But traces remained in Chelsea's system. And in Genene's locker, investigators found unaccounted drugs, expired vials, disconnected records, even handwritten notes detailing doses and patient names. They had enough. Genene Jones was arrested and charged with murder. At first, she denied everything. But the numbers kept rising. The final estimate? As many as 60 infants may have died under her care. Some experts believe the true number could be higher. In 1984, Genene Jones went to trial for the murder of Chelsea McClellan. The courtroom was stunned as the prosecution laid out the case. A healthy child, a nurse with unauthorized medication, a syringe full of death. Medical experts testified, so did grieving parents, nurses, pharmacists. Genene sat quietly, no emotion, no apology. She was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. But the nightmare wasn't over. Texas law at the time allowed for parole after serving part of the sentence. And in 2018, Genene Jones was scheduled for release. The public was outraged. Faced with a media storm and national backlash, prosecutors scrambled. They reopened cold cases. In 2020, Genene pled guilty to 4 additional murders. This time, the sentence was life. No parole, no escape. The angel of death was finally caged. 4 women, dozens of victims, one thing in common: trust, weaponized. From the hospital to the home, from newborns to grown men, they killed in silence, in anger, in secret. But the stories are no longer hidden. If you found this story chilling, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss another deep dive into true crime's darkest corners. And tell us in the comments below, which case shocked you the most?